and then we'll hand it off to you. Is that okay?
All right. Okay.
So everybody who's on this call, I think we have over 50 attendees. Thank you so much for joining us. We'd like to welcome you to our first ever monthly meeting that is video based. Welcome to COVID-19. More importantly than anything else, we hope that you and your families remain healthy against this terrible pandemic. Our board of directors have been meeting on a monthly basis via video to discuss the ever-changing landscape that's happened on a week-over-week basis. Specifically, we've been trying to add content and provide information to each of you via weekly webinars and creating a forum to even get together via socially our weekly happy hours. We hope that all of you are able to attend one or more of those weekly events. In addition, our communications team has put out an FEI Arizona LinkedIn Thought Leadership Series featuring 15 of our sponsors providing short snippets of information. These videos have already received over 5,000 views, and we still have 3 more days of sponsors to get through. We have a couple of housekeeping issues and items to discuss. We will plan on sending Jim's slide deck to all the attendees after the webinar. He has a tremendous amount of information on his slide deck. I think the slide deck is in excess of over 150 slides. There's a lot of data here. We're not expecting you to take pictures or memorize the data. He's going to be spinning through many of them very quickly here, but we'll be providing you the entire deck after the webinar. If you have a question for Jim at the end of the presentation, please use the raise the hand option at the bottom of the screen. Robin will unmute you to ask it when we get to Q&A, which will be at the very end of this webinar. We have one order of business to attend to. Our May meeting typically is our annual meeting where we go through nominations of the board of directors as well as officers. James is past president of FEI Arizona. He's on the board of directors. He has graciously been chair of the nominations committee. And James, I'd like to hand the floor over to you, please.
Thank you, Adam. So we would like to thank our slate of officers and board members. This is a very unusual circumstance. This year we sent out to everyone, hopefully you received your email with the officers and board members for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. And but what we are doing this year is a little different than other years, is that we've decided to retain all of the members in the board and the officers in their same roles. Normally we would transition to a new president and new first vice president and so forth, but given the dynamic environment we're in with COVID and with the unique circumstances we're in, we felt as a board that it was going to be more helpful for everyone to kind of stay in their current roles and be able to transition through this. So especially to Adam and Robbie and Adam Miller and Rachel, special thanks to them for being willing to take on these duties again for the second time. And we're hopeful that as we roll through this, we'll get back to normal very shortly, and then in future years we'll continue to roll through our normal process. But with that, our officers for this year, and by the way, I guess I'll interrupt myself one more time. There will be a poll question that will pop up on your screen for both the officers and the board slate. I will pause at the end of each reading of the officers to wait for you to vote, and then you'll have the same opportunity for the board slate. So if you are an FEI member, please vote. If you're not an FEI member, please abstain. And so our slate of officers for, again, 2020-2021 is Adam Remus, President, Robbie Molnar, First Vice President, Adam Miller, Secretary and Treasurer, and Rachel Stewart as past President. If everyone could take a moment and click on the poll, that would be great. feel like we should have the Jeopardy music playing in the background. All right, I will now move on to the board members. So our board members for the 2020-2021 fiscal year are Michael Day, Ben Dobson, Susan Hunsaker, Andrea Jones, David Clem, Donald Laughlin, Eric Malik, Chris Niezgotsky, Nathan O'Connor, Alan Perrell, Gabriela Reyes, and James Walbom. Please click on your voting option now. All right, and with that, I will turn the time back over to Adam. Again, thank you to our board members and officers for all the work that they do on our behalf. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much, James. We appreciate that, and we appreciate all the members who are on this video call who have just voted. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jim Glassman. And Jim is from Chase Bank. As Managing Director and Head Economist for Chase Commercial Banking, Jim Glassman provides market insights to help clients better understanding the changing economy and its impact on their business. Mr. Glassman also works closely with the firm's corporate sector, including the Chief Investment Office and Investor Relations, as well as the investment bank and government relations groups, providing financial analysis and research. A publisher of independent research on the principal forces shaping the economy and financial markets, Mr. Glassman is regularly cited in the financial media, where he is also a frequent commentator on economic policy issues. Additionally, he is a long-standing participant in the widely followed Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia Survey of Professional Forecasters and the National Association of Business Economists panel on macroeconomic forecasters. Jim, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for your willingness to be part and be part of this webinar. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to do share screen, right, Robin? And see if I can open up my file wherever it is, wherever it went. There. Okay. I'm only going to ask you to look at a couple pictures that I think are. I just want to explain them to you so you can make sense of it when you look at these later. But sometimes visuals help see where we're going. I think, you know, we all know basically there's no template for this thing that we're living with. This, you know, as recently as February, we all thought things were great. I think we didn't quite realize that what was going on in Asia was going to ripple back here because the other ones didn't. And the economy was in good shape. And frankly, the Fed kept saying that. And the thing that was amazing, most of us, is that we never really realized in my career, we always thought that when you get an economy back to levels of unemployment as low as what we were getting, 3.5%, businesses couldn't find people to fill 7 million jobs. We all thought that when you get there, you'd have a lot of inflation. And in fact, we never did. And so I'm still kind of in awe of where we had come until this virus. And so, you know, that's why when we think about what we're living with here, there's a lot of debate going on in my community. Should you think of this as the way we normally think about a business cycle, or is this really something else? In my mind, I think it's more appropriate, not exact, but I think it's more appropriate to think about that what we're living with is more like a natural disaster than it is a typical business cycle. And what I mean by that is kind of illustrated on this picture. What I'm showing you is all the business cycles that we've been through since mostly these are post-war business cycles. And what I show you is in every cycle, I start the clock when the economy has reached a really good level. It's before unemployment, before the economy falls, before unemployment starts to rise. Each one of these lines is showing you the evolution of how things usually work. Unemployment, every cycle starts at a different place, but I start the clock at 0. And when the economy trips into recession, unemployment slowly deteriorates. And what this picture is showing you is how all of these cycles have worked in the past. Forget about the thick red line. And so this is the classic cycle is unemployment, the economy slowing, it's starting to feel heavy, unemployment starts creeping up, and in about, within a year or two, you get unemployment peaks out, and then it kind of takes quite a few years to get back to on our feet. And the red line that's here is where we are right now. So I start the clock in February this year. As you know, last week you saw the unemployment rate going up to 14% or more. What I'm showing you is the deviation of any point in time. These lines are showing you where unemployment is relative to where you started. So we started at 3.5%, got to 14%, and that's where that red line is moving up to 11%. And what the picture is showing you is my vision of how we're supposed to think about this thing. Unemployment exploded, and that once we get everybody back to work, get things opened up, we should expect to see things coming back to life pretty quickly. And now you look at that. Most people look at this and they say, well, gee, that's awfully optimistic. I don't know, because I think what's happening is when you're in the middle of something really scary, you tend to think, well, you tend to think about all these cycles we've been through, and people want to talk about the Great Depression and business cycles. And we know that when the economy tumbles, it often takes a long time. And honestly, just to give you a hint what I'm thinking about here, normally back in 2009, when the economy slipped into a bad recession, my people asked me, what would you economists, how long do you think it'll take to get out of this recession based on what we know about business cycles? And my reaction was pretty much what everybody's reaction was. Well, it's going to take you probably 10 years. We actually did better than I expected, but it took about 10 years. If you asked me the same question today, I would totally tear up the script. I would say there's nothing in our history that helps me understand this. And I'm thinking of it more, this was not your father's downturn. It's not going to be your father's recovery. And so this is kind of an illustration. The dashed line is kind of my illustration of how I'm thinking about this. I think within a year or two, we'll be pretty much on our way back, get back to where we were. And so secondly, I think if you think this is overly optimistic, I think I have to show you something else, which you may be aware of, but I think it's important. I always start as a reality check. What is we all have opinions, and a lot of them are based on emotion. It's very hard to see the future when you're in the middle of something you haven't seen before. But I pay a lot of attention to the stock market because this is where people put their money to work. They're betting on their opinions. And I always think the market can be wrong. Like it's just a collection of all of us. But I think it's important to understand what the collection of all of us is thinking about. And I think it's stunning myself. If you think I'm optimistic, I think the market's optimistic. And what I mean by that is what I'm showing you, the yellow line there is the Wilshire 5000 index, the index of all publicly traded stocks. The scale is the left-hand side. The blue shaded areas are after-tax profits of American businesses. And to me, when the economy is in a good place, close to full employment, no inflation problem, it's about the best you expect to get, I would expect the value of the stock market to be roughly, the value of the Wilshire index to be roughly 14 times earnings. And when the market is what I consider to be 14 times earnings, or at a reasonably good place whenever the economy gets back, back in shape, that yellow line should be floating along the top of the blue shaded area. That's where the top, where earnings is. So if I went to sleep 10 years ago and I woke up today and you said to me, what do you think's going on? My instinct would be, okay, let me look at the stock market and see what's going on. And I would see this picture and I would say, the market looks, it's not cheap. The value of the stock market is floating at 14, 15 times earnings. And I would say, it looks like you're in a good spot, that everything's fine. I would never have a clue based on this, that we're in the middle of a once in a 1,000-year phenomenon that we've never seen before, where we shut the economy down, shutter a lot of businesses because we're trying to social distance and control the virus. The thing that what I would find even more stunning about this, the two blue shaded areas in this picture are telling you there's something unbelievable that's been going on in the market. The light blue area is what profits would be if after-tax profits match the post-war average, 6%, after-tax profits, 6% of GDP. So the stock and the blue, heavy blue area is actually the actual level. The total blue areas are the total value, the total amount of after-tax profits. And what the picture is trying to tell you is the market may look reasonably valued relative to current earnings, but earnings are 50% above where they normally have been. And I think this is what the equity market has been, why the equity market's been sort of chugging along, consistently doing better, because I think people in all of our, in the economics community, we're trying to understand what is going on here. We think there's something really powerful, something really structural that's been going on. It's got to do with innovation. It's got to do with the better performance of the economy, where you can have low levels of unemployment without inflation. And it's got to do with the world around us that's waking up in the last 20 years, wants to go to work because everybody is poor and they want to be like us. And it's creating massive opportunities in Asia. Well, this is the story we knew coming into this crisis. And what's amazing to me is, despite the huge disruption going on here in the economy, the market is only down like 15 to 16% from the all-time peak back in mid-February. So in my mind, I think, you might think that this story that I'm going to tell you seems optimistic. I look at the equity market and I think the only way I can explain what the equity market's doing is people must generally believe the idea that what we're looking at is a phenomenon that looks more like a natural disaster than a business cycle. And what this is overly simple, but when I think about this, what I'm sort of thinking about in my mind is Hurricane Katrina wiped out New Orleans. Within 5 months, unemployment in New Orleans came back down to where we were before the hurricane. Well, part of the reason for that was because everybody scattered to Baton Rouge and Houston. But actually, within 2 years, employment in New Orleans was right back where it started, unlike most business cycles. So I think that tells you if there's something that happens, and then we're focused on trying to repair the damage and get things back, it can happen a lot faster than you think. So that's, to me, a reality check that you've got to sort of keep in the back of your mind as you're thinking about how should we think about what this is going to look like and what's coming on the other side. Now, on the other side, let me go back to unshare this, because I think you can look. I can talk through most of the other pictures later. When you're thinking about what's coming on the other side, there's two things you have to think about. First of all, how long we're going to have to keep the economy shuttered, and that depends on what's going on. Do we have control of the virus or not? And secondly, how well are the actions we're taking protecting people and connecting people to their jobs, so that when we let businesses wake up again, we can start up faster. On the virus issue, I think you know, you got to remember why did we get here? Why did we take this path? Social distancing, shuttering businesses to try to figure out how to flatten the curve. The health officials were calling it. I think it's important to remember the reason we did this is because we were in the middle of flu season, and our health officials feared that we really didn't have the capacity in the hospital system to manage a pandemic. And so, and if you looked at all these forecasts from the University of Washington is famous for forecasting how many ICU beds do we have, how many do we need, how many ventilators do we have in hospitals, how do we need, and they were predicting that we were going to be really short. The system was going to be maxed out, overloaded by early April as a result of this virus. So a lot of, everybody kind of deferred to the call of the health officials. And I think that story is changing dramatically. And that's one of the reasons I think why more and more communities are trying to figure out how to get things back to work. What's been going on is more and more supplies getting to the hospitals. Secondly, they've got some clever ways. There's a voluntary system they're using to redistribute these invasive ventilators. So a lot of hospitals have a lot of spare capacity, and there's a voluntary system that there's a report on this from the Council of Economic Advisors, and we're trying to just figure out a way to reallocate the resources in the same way that we manage surge capacity when there's a natural disaster from a hurricane or something. And what the experts claim is that we actually have a fair amount of supply now in the hospital system that we're not really short anymore. And part of the reason is because we're figuring out better ways of managing this stuff. And part of it is because there's more supply coming in the market. And part of it is that the flu season is passing and winding down, and the number of new infections every day is gradually slowing down. We're not really quite seeing like what they had in South Korea or China, but we're getting there. So I think, if you could start this debate over again, if our hospital system, we didn't want to have to put hospitals and doctors in the position of having to decide who gets the ventilators and who doesn't. It didn't seem right. So you can understand why we went this way. But I think we also need to understand that when you shut the economy down and wreak havoc like this, it also has consequences. It affects health as well. There's all kinds of consequences from this. So, but I think when you think about where we are in this particular epidemic, people feel like we're starting to get a grip. In many areas, the cases are slowing down quite a bit. And now the big worry is, well, if we let people go back to work too quickly, there could be a problem. I think this is why, looking around the country, you get the feeling that we're getting a little frustrated because we understand the need to social distance. We think there's smarter ways to do this without shutting the economy down. And we're realizing that this is wreaking havoc. So the sooner we can get people back to work and get things started up again, and this is starting to happen, the easier it'll be to get back on our feet. Now, the second thing, the reason why I'm a little more optimistic than maybe many of my peers about the ability to get back on our feet more quickly is because I think the policy response in Washington turned out, in an environment where we are all very divided as a body politic, and Washington just reflects that, is amazing to me that in the face of a crisis, we were able to understand what needed to be done and come up with the right idea. It's a little hard to implement something too new, but what I'm referring to is, to me, the first thing that people thought about that we wanted to do. We have 57 million people who work at small businesses. They're very hard to reach. It's easy to figure out if Boeing has a problem. It's real easy for us to figure out how to deal with Boeing. But if you've got almost 60 million people, working at small establishments, some of them have, everybody has a banking relationship, but not always. It's very different. The fear was, how do you reach those guys? And those are the very guys who are most harmed right now, because when you shutter restaurants, fitness centers, bars, can't go to, I can't fly, I can't go to the ballpark. There's just an awful lot of guys that are working in businesses that employ fewer than 500 employees. So to me, the encouraging thing that we saw was right away they realized they had to come up with a program like the Small Business Administration's PPP program, Paycheck Protection Program. The idea being, we'll pay you, business, if you pay your workers for 2 months, and then you get a little extra change to pay for utilities and rent and mortgage payment. And the whole idea made a lot of sense. And when you heard Senator Rubio and Senator Schumer, the whole idea behind this program was, we need to make sure that we keep people attached to their businesses, to their employers, so that when we open things up again, they don't have to go out and figure out how to hire people and train them, because it can take you 6 months, even in a restaurant, to figure out how to get started up again. So I think the idea behind these programs was the right idea, and it was all aimed at trying to figure out how to basically put the small business community in a flight holding pattern to just keep everybody even until we get through this. Now, you might say, well, gee, last week we learned that there's a boatload of people who are unemployed. The unemployment rate went up 14%. It would have been worse had people not dropped out. And the thing that was really interesting about that employment report is when they took the snapshot of the labor market in early April, it's the week that contains the 12th, when they took that snapshot, they found that there are 17 million more people right now unemployed than back in February. They asked these people for the reasons why they're unemployed. You might be unemployed because you quit your job, you lost a job permanently, you've been out raising kids, but you're coming back into the job market, or you're just a college kid coming out of school and you're just joining the market, coming into the job market for the first time. And the other answer is, well, I'm on temporary unemployment. You know what was really interesting? Virtually every single person who was unemployed in April said that they were unemployed because they were on temporary layoff, which is interesting because they know what's going on. They talk to their employers. And, what's really interesting to me, if this PPP program, the thing to know about it is it got a rocky start because it's a new program. It was very jammed. If you looked at how many businesses actually got PPP loans in that early April period when they took the snapshot of the job market, very little had gotten out. The first wave of PPP money was fully accounted for, but it takes time to process all the loans, and you as a business can't do anything about it until you actually get money from the PPP program. Well, when I looked at the C&I loans, commercial and industrial loans, that the banks report every week, if you look at that week when they took the snapshot of a job market, there was virtually hardly any money had gone out from the PPP program. That all began to accelerate later in April. So now, to me, the whole program, about $650 billion has been allocated to the PPP program. If that program, if that works, what it means is almost 55 million people are going to be covered. The only way you can get a loan forgiven is if you are going to pay for your people, put them back on your book. Now, here's the thing. So if the PPP program works as is intended, then what it means is that there's nobody who works for a small business should be unemployed eventually. But here's the thing. It's going to be it's kind of uncertain how we're going to see all this work out. If everybody who's getting these PPP loans, if they want the loan forgiven, they have to pay their workers, but we don't know when the clock starts on that process. And I think for a lot of guys, there's a lot of discretion here. And I think for a lot of people, what they're doing is they're allowing their workers to go to unemployment insurance, so they've been furloughed. But the signal to them must be that we're going to do this until we figure out how to work the PPP program. So that's why all these folks who are unemployed probably understand what's going to happen. And I think, if you're a business, it actually makes sense to do it this way, to use the unemployment insurance system to take care of your people until you figure out when to get this program started. If unemployment insurance covers your people up to the point that you then start to use the PPP money to put these guys back on your payroll, it gives you more time to work through this whole thing. So I don't know, my feeling was if all that PPP money were being put to work, we should see most of that unemployment that happened in April should come down. But it might take a few months. It might take until June because we don't quite know when businesses are going to start this process. But I think, but this gets to the main point that if the aim of these programs between unemployment insurance and the PPP program is to give people a safety net that at least can sort of match what they were earning as waiters or in the fitness centers, then we have a much better chance of not panicking people, making them feel a little more comfortable that it's okay, we've got their back. And it'll make it a lot easier to start everything up again. I think the other wrinkle in the other response, the policymakers, that to me was pretty encouraging, is that we've always worried that gig workers, people who drive Ubers or Lyfts or independent contractors, we've always worried that they, in the event of a crisis, they wouldn't have a safety net because they're not eligible for unemployment insurance money. But what the federal government did was they created a whole new program that was given to the state unemployment insurance system, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, that basically opened up the unemployment insurance system to people who are self-employed or independent contractors, and they doubled the benefits for most of the state unemployment insurance system. So when you look at the amount of income that people are able to earn, even though they're not working and they're on unemployment insurance, for many people, it's really not going to be very different than what they were earning as waiters or Uber drivers. And so there's 10 million people who are self-employed or independent contractors, and those guys, they really couldn't start applying for unemployment insurance until the 28th last week, the 20th of April. But so basically what this means is that you've got most of the people who are most vulnerable to shuttering restaurants and places where we all gather have got safety nets that are much better than we normally see in a recession. And so that's why I think the effort to try to keep people attached to their jobs, and everything about last week's unemployment report kind of felt that that's what we were seeing, then that just means it's going to be easier to get going again when we open things up. But honestly, what I worry the most about is it's no problem. There's smart ways that we can do social distancing and have people protect themselves more. But I think the business model for a restaurant, for a fitness center, for a bar, for Disney World, for the airlines, it just doesn't really work with social distancing. If you're going to ask people, you're going to say to people, you can go back. And I think a lot of young people don't really feel that threatened by this thing because their immune systems are better than older people, as we've been told many times. But I think the problem is if we're going to insist that people go back and do things that they were doing before, but stay distanced, wearing a mask is no problem, but it just doesn't work if you're a restaurant. So I think the trickiest thing here is trying to figure out what life looks like as we open things up again, but we insist on some kind of social distancing, because I mean, I think the biggest problem is how do you ask people to go back to work in the office, but then you only let 2 people get on the elevator at a time? There's no way that works unless you can speed the elevators up to move 5 times as fast as they go now. So you can understand there's just going to be an awful lot of challenges trying to figure out how you get things moving again and still follow social distancing guidelines. But I think longer term, if people are asking, well, is this a crisis going to change the way we do anything? In my mind, it's going to accelerate a lot of the things that were happening anyway. The move from traditional retailing to online shopping, maybe virtual communication, although it's not the best. There are things that are going on here. Technology will probably speed up and help us do some of these things better. But honestly, I ask myself, what will we all think? Will we all think that life is going to change dramatically in the future the minute somebody invents a vaccination and the minute we get better antivirals? And there's just a ton of energy going into this process right now. I think it's all, everyone tells you, well, these things can take 1 or 2 years. When you look at the kind of things that are going on in various vaccination trials, I mean, it looks to me like we're doing everything we can to break down the barriers to make this happen pretty quickly. So I think it's difficult to imagine how we can actually get back to something more normal when we're still trying to insist that people keep distances. But I really think that this is more a short-term problem, and that within a year, we're going to have a biotechnology answer to this crisis that will make us all breathe a lot easier. And the minute we have that, I don't think, most people don't feel threatened by this. Most people feel healthy and their immune systems are great. And I think they're frustrated that they can't go back to do things the way they were doing. And I think the minute we get an answer to this particular virus, we're going to be very quick to want to get back to something more normal. So let me just, before I close and open up for questions, let me remind you of something. I think a lot of people believe, they may be a little skeptical, but they hear the story about we can get back faster than we normally do from a recession. But I think people are getting a little nervous about what's going on with the consumer, because they believe that the consumer is going to be a big part of this. And if the consumer is impaired and nervous and panicky, how are we going to get the economy back? I think the thing to remember is the consumer, when we came into this crisis in March, if the consumer was getting nervous about the economy and nervous about their jobs, what they would normally be doing is, well, they would start to slow down their spending. They would try to save a little more because they're getting nervous. That's not what happened. What happened is consumer spending in March plunged. And it plunged because I couldn't go to my dentist. I couldn't go to my doctor to do elective procedure. I couldn't go to the restaurant. I couldn't go shopping. I couldn't go to the bar. I wasn't allowed to go to my fitness center. I can't even play with a ball machine at my fitness center, and it's not a human. I was asked not to fly. So if you tell Americans, sorry, temporarily you can't spend money, well, they'll listen to you. But what happened was consumer spending dropped, as you would expect, and saving exploded. saving by the American household exploded by about almost $1 trillion. The saving rate doubled. Americans are not real enthusiastic about saving. So when a thing like that happens, it tells you it's happening not because people are getting nervous, it's happening because there were no outlets for people to spend. And I think that phenomena, that dynamic is going to come back when we start to wake things up. You're going to find out that consumers have a lot of ammunition, and they're with the saving rate exploding from 7% to 13%, which is totally unnatural. I've never seen anything quite like that. It just tells you that temporarily we're not spending because we can't. There are not many outlets we can go to. All I can spend is on online and the carryout business. So I think when you think about the dynamic, that's why this happened and how it happened, and what's going on with the consumer, it's a lot easier to see how when we start waking things up, you're going to see consumer spending come back as quickly as it evaporated. And it's probably the auto industry that will see this happen first, because purchases like autos are discretionary and you can postpone those kinds of things. But if I can't go to the dealer, I'm not going to buy a car. I'll just wait for a couple months. So I think everything about what's, to me, there's so many weird things that are going on, and they don't look to me like things that are, it wasn't natural. It happened because we told people we need to shutter. So we can't be too shocked that if you tell people you can't spend money, they're not going to spend money, because there aren't that many ways to do it. And I think we've seen a really dramatic unraveling of the economy. And I think you're going to see something very similar on the other side. And there's a lot of frustration. I think people are really anxious to get back to something more normal. My daughter showed me how you hug. You put a blanket over yourself and hug. But I think people are desperate for social interaction. And that's going to be the kind of thing that drives a lot of this. So just to give you, here's a couple thoughts to think about that connects what we're doing on the policy side and how that might be helping. The way I think about this is, we produce GDP is about 22 billion annually, which means that we produce about 55 billion of GDP per day. Call it 60 billion. We economists think that all this shuttering of restaurants and everything has cut GDP by about 10%. You'll see that when you get the second quarter GDP numbers. We think GDP fell 10%. When you annualize that, which is how they report it, it'll show up as a 40% decline in GDP in the second quarter. So if GDP is down 10%, that means we're losing about $6 billion per day of GDP, or $6 billion of income. Over the course of a month, it might be 180 billion. Over the course of 2 months, it might be 360. Well, the point of that is to remind you that when Congress is sitting here spending almost $3 trillion, and a lot of it is to fund unemployment insurance and the PPP program, which gives businesses an ability to pay their workers, that money is pretty sufficient to cover the lost income that is taking place, as long as this doesn't go beyond that far. It's just telling you that the kind of numbers that are being thrown around spending ought to be sufficient to at least put us all in a holding pattern for several months, between the unemployment insurance system, which pays workers, and then the PPP program, which is kind of an unemployment insurance, but paying businesses to pay for that. So I think what it tells you is, near term, we probably have our hands around the problem. The tougher challenge is, how do we get people back and still follow social distancing guidelines? But I think beyond that, I think it's just a matter, the the final answer really comes when we have a biotech answer and we have a vaccine and better antivirals. And I think it's not just the US, the whole world is faced with this crisis. And what that means is there is a tremendous amount of energy going into understanding this virus, coming up with an answer all around the world, whether it's China, here, Europe, everywhere. There's just, we've sort of unlocked a lot of human potential to tackle this problem. And I wouldn't, you know, our feeling is, when I listen to my colleagues who follow this more closely, our feeling is that things are happening faster on this front than we thought might happen when this whole crisis unfolded. So I'm going to stop there unless people want to talk a little bit about the Fed's programs. Could that cause problems down the road? We can talk about that if you want to, but let me stop there so that you guys have time to ask questions and dig into things that you're interested in.
I'm gonna, Paul Badavicki had a question. Hold on, Paul, let me unmute you.
Yeah.
Paul, go ahead.
Oh, you might be on mute.
I unmuted him. Paul? Paul? Okay, I'm gonna go to Marcus Fetter. He has a question too. Hold on, Marcus. Hold on. Okay, Marcus,
Yes, I'm here.
go ahead with your question.
So not to monopolize your time, Jim, but I guess I'm just, with everything you've said, I'm interested to know if you think that it's likely we'll see some sort of a significant new normal, and if so, what will that look like? I know that's a prediction, but what will it look like in 1, 3, 5 years? Is there going to be something that you think is going to significantly change the underlying dynamics in a longer, medium-term view? And then if I could, just one other question, just your thoughts about how this is going to impact supply chains in the third world countries and any impact with us.
Yeah, you know, there are going to be changes. I think we're all stunned that the offshoring of so much stuff left us kind of vulnerable when it comes to strategically important things. But I think that the main focus is on the healthcare issue. The fact that we didn't have the ability to ramp up production of ventilators and N95 masks and things like that. So I think all around the world, there is a rethinking going on that we may see some reshoring of supply chains that affect our ability to handle a pandemic. But honestly, my feeling is that when it comes to, you know, manufacturing and other things, life is we're going to continue the way we were. That the world, we're all getting much more connected, and there's a lot of energy going on elsewhere. And it's, for some things, particularly in medical care, where the margin is quite substantial, it makes sense to reshore some of that, and it's not very expensive. But a lot of this offshoring and outsourcing is areas where the margins are not that great. And to bring a lot of that production back here would really be probably not economical. And so I sort of picture what's going to happen. I sort of have in my mind something that I learned from the supply chains for the auto industry. Remember when the tsunami hit Japan? When was that, 2005? The tsunami hit Japan, knocked out the Fukushima nuclear plant. I didn't realize it, but at the time we learned that a lot of the supply chains for the auto industry were quite concentrated in that area. And I remember talking to a guy from Mercedes about this, and he said to me in the middle of the crisis, he said, you know, we realized that we probably should diversify the supply chain more than we have. But he said to me, when this crisis passes, I doubt we're going to do it because it's very expensive to do that. And there are tremendous benefits. If you can convince yourself that Fukushima was a one-off crisis and it'll never happen again, and they're dismantling the thing, then it's not going to happen. And if you can believe yourself, to me, if what we're dealing with right now, if we don't find some kind of medical answer to the virus, then certainly we're dealing with a new normal. But if we find a vaccination for this virus, like we do for the flu, like we do for TB, like we do for a lot of the diseases we've dealt with, then the minute we have it, I think people we're going to be inclined to go right back and do things the way we were doing it. So
Even
that's
if
why I
it's
think
a dress rehearsal.
Yeah. Well, it could be because there's going to be more of these things, right? But here's what I would see. I think there's some important lessons we're learning here, and they don't require that we redo the way our economy works. There's two things in particular. One, we've realized that a private healthcare system isn't going to be able to build surge capacity for when there's a pandemic, because these things happen randomly. They've done a really good job of being able to handle the flu season, which comes and goes in the winter, goes away in the summer. But I think what we've learned is we need to help our healthcare system have better surge capacity so that when these things they happen, we don't have to shut the economy down. The second thing we've learned, I hope we look at this more carefully. It's getting a little bit of attention. If we ever in the future have to shut the economy down, and honestly, I think we're going to realize that this does a lot of damage to health as well when you do this. But if we ever have to do this again, I think we need to figure out a better way to protect people for a temporary shutdown. Well, somebody has figured this out already. If you look at what goes on in Germany, Germany has a program called Kurzarbeit, short work program. It's been around for 100 years. And what they do when there's a short-term dislocation, like something like this, if companies need to shut down, they notify the government, and the government automatically sends them a check to cover the payroll costs for their workers, whether you're a big company or a little company. That's exactly what this PPP program is trying to copy the spirit of that. And I think the benefit of that is that you make it easier when you have a short-term, when you have to temporarily shutter the economy, you make it easier to start it up again. And if you look back at what happened in 2008 and 9, when the whole world went into a recession because of the financial crisis and the housing crisis, well, unemployment, in most places, unemployment went up. And certainly in the US, unemployment went up. If you look at Germany, it went down. You never saw the crisis that hit us. It hit their economy, but it didn't hit their labor market. And I think it enabled them to sort of get moving faster. You don't scare workers. You keep them attached. You don't lose the skills they've got. You make it easier to start up again. I think, to me, those are that's the new normal I would like to see, because I think we did this we only did this because we didn't have the capacity to handle another wave of sickness. And I think there are smarter ways that we can handle this kind of thing in the future. We're probably certainly going to have another one of these things again, but I hope to God that we don't have to shut the economy down to get a grip on the thing, because it does a lot of damage. And I think our system is very complicated. You can understand how China's economy is a lot more primitive, and the government has a lot of control. So they can, they went down for a month and they're back already a month later. Our system is a lot more complicated, and it's much more service oriented. So, when people postpone purchasing, if I don't get a haircut, I'm not going to get two haircuts when we finally open up. There's a lot of opportunity that's just lost when you have a service economy, which is why it can be so much more expensive for us than for China, because they're much more of a production economy they need access to they still depend a lot on us to feed our consumer markets. So I think, just one more thought, I think personally, I think that when we have a vaccine, people are going to be no thought, no reservation, getting back on a plane, go to Disney World. Because, this is a different crisis than what we faced. If you remember, after 9/11, when airplanes went into buildings, we never even thought of that possibility. And it took a long time for Americans to get used to the idea that airplanes could be safe. I think everybody feels, if they don't have to worry about catching a virus from somebody, and a vaccine will make you feel better about that, I don't think we'll have any second thought about getting back on an airplane to make the business travel, or go on vacation, or go visit family. I think the bigger challenges might be for commercial real estate. If we have to rethink the way if this event is accelerating the movement toward virtual kinds of communication, people may start wondering how do we really need a lot of that office space? And can we move people safely up and down elevators if we need social distancing? The guys in real estate are thinking hard about this. They seem to be the ones that are most focused on what could a new normal look like, and will it affect us? I think for everything else, after a year, assuming we're going to have a vaccine within a year, I don't think we'll be spending a lot of time redoing how life works.
Jim, can we go on to another question real quick? So I'm just going to read it to you. If unemployment is currently in the mid-teens, when do you see it at 10% or 8%?
By the end of the year, I think we'll see it, frankly, because, and here's what I mean. If most of these guys who are unemployed that we saw in April, 14%, if most of them are now on unemployment insurance and they're just waiting for their companies to start the clock on taking advantage of the PPP program, my guess is over the summer months, you're going to see a lot of that unemployment come down. And I think if we can get the economy moving again, waking up, I personally, that picture I first showed you, I have the unemployment rate getting back to where we were within a couple of years. So by the end of this year, I'd sort of picture it in the 6 to 7% range. To me, this is all a short-term dislocation caused by not allowing big sections of the economy to operate.
Okay. So I have another question. Do you have any projections on the Arizona economy, specifically giving our over dependence on retail, hospitality, etc.?
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I look at, I think most states would like to have trends that Arizona has had. The problem is Arizona had just a phenomenal boom in the previous decade. So you're comparing everything with what happened in that decade. I think realistically, you have to know that for retail is probably going to see the biggest changes, because I think a lot of people are discovering that there is a lot of benefit in shopping online as opposed to the convenience is there. So that's going to be a challenge. But I think what you're going to find is that areas like Arizona, areas that are less dense, I keep hearing people tell me that millennials, we're all migrating to urban areas. I think this crisis is making people rethink that. And I wouldn't be surprised if, for all the challenges in the retail sector that you might see, I'll bet you anything that places like Phoenix, places that are less dense, are going to see a movement of the population, which is already going on anyway, out of the Midwest, Chicago, as people retire, moving to the Southwest, moving south, and moving to Florida. I think it's hard to know how there's so many moving parts in this story that I don't think you really know. And you could think something big is going to change, and then discover by fall we have a vaccine or antiviral treatment that suddenly diffuses this crisis. And then everyone's going to say, I'm just going back to the way it was. And it'll be hard to know what the long-term implication of that is. I think if you thought that we were going to be facing more and more pandemics, that's what makes people think I've got to rethink my life, and I got to rethink how I live, where I live. And I think it's too early to know.
Okay. What is your opinion on the proposed HEROES Act from today?
I don't know what's in it. It's probably changing all the time. I don't know. I don't know exactly what's in there. I'm assuming it's a lot of money they're talking about, right? There's a lot of money. I don't know exactly the guts of what it's targeted to. There's probably going to be some money in there. They must know there's a possibility they will have to extend the PPP program, which helps folks at small businesses. The healthcare system has gotten a lot of money through the CARES Act and through other things. I think there's just a lot of business. I personally think the sector that is going to be most struggling now is the state and local communities, because a lot of communities depend on tourism. The revenues aren't there. And there's probably a lot more help that's going to be needed. So I don't really know what's in it. And as we learned with the previous program, it's, you know, the House has got big ambitions. The Republican side is not so enthusiastic. They sort of want to see whether things work. So I think we're getting more and more. The first rounds, we had everybody on the same wavelength. I think every wave that we're getting here, you're going to get more and more, hold on, let's wait and see what's going on.
Okay. What other significant insights should we look for in your slide deck?
Well, I think all of the stuff, you know, what I find very clever, there's a chart in there that shows you a better way, another way to track influenza sicknesses. I think we've done we don't get a lot of good information on tracking the population that's ill, because if we're not testing people, we don't know. And if we're not testing people with antibodies, we don't know what % of the population is actually been exposed to this. And there's a company, I think there's a company called Kinsa Health, which tells you what the future might look like, how much you can use data, big data, to track people better. And what we're learning from the Korean experience is that if you're tracking people better, you can manage the spread of the crisis better. This company, there's a picture in there that shows you Kinsa Health. You can look at it yourself, called healthweather.us, if you want to see what they do, and you can track what they see in your county by county. This is what they do. They have a population of 1 million people, statistically representative of the US population. They give them smart thermometers, and the thermometer feeds real-time information on people, on the fever anybody has, through their phones and their iPads. And these people claim that by following the fevers of the population, they get more immediate information on what's really going on. And what they showed is that the population that had atypical fevers, it kind of exploded back in February, in early March. By late March, the fever broke. And their population that has fevers is basically zero right now. So what they think is, what they claim this is doing is telling you if the social distancing is working. And secondly, it tells you they think that the wave is turned. And that if you follow this, there's a picture of it shows you the % of the population that has a fever, the % deviation from normal that has a fever, and then they correlates it with the CDC numbers that are showing you the people who have infections. And what it tells you is they saw a slowdown in the infection wave back in March, and it's now beginning to show up in the CDC numbers. So I think that's interesting because it's just a reminder that there are smarter ways of getting on top of influenza-like respiratory issues, because most respiratory issues, you generate a fever. And being able to do that, it seems like a relatively simple way to do it and a very clever way to do it. And you would think that it's a reminder of a technology, a better use of technology is part of the answer here to monitoring and getting ahead of epidemic problems.
Okay, so we have 3 more questions. We'll go through those pretty quickly here if we can. So if it takes a year to get a vaccine, how does the airline industry have the ability to last that long?
I don't know. I mean, you've seen the pictures of some of the planes, right? The airlines are breaking them up and not giving you direct flights. And some of the planes are crowded. And that makes me think there's a lot of people who don't seem to be fearful of flying. I don't know how, but honestly, when I got the email from United a week or so ago, and they said, we're not going to have somebody in the middle seat. I don't know how that works, frankly. It's not profitable. It's not hard. You can't make money if you run a business where you cut out 1/3 of the folks. And I don't know whether you can put people in the seat behind you. So it doesn't work. And it has to work because this is an important industry. It's critical to our defense. There's no way we're going to let it go away. And what it means is we'll have to do what we're doing which is provide ongoing subsidies to the airlines until we can figure out how to get everything back to normal. I think people are hopeful that there will be enough happening on the antiviral side so that at least you don't have to worry about what happens if you get it. But I think you're going to see things happening I don't know if it's going to take a year. I wouldn't be surprised if by fall we have enough confidence there's like 70 different vaccines in trial right now, working through the pipeline. I wouldn't be surprised if we have something more promising relatively sooner than a year. But it's the right question because it's a reminder that there's a lot of businesses. Airlines is the one that comes to your mind. Social distancing does not work with their business model, unless we're all willing to pay twice the price that we pay for an airline ticket, and I don't think so.
Jim, this is Adam Remus. Listen, let's ask one last question, and we're about 15-20 minutes over, but we started about 15-20 minutes late because of our technical issues. What impact could the election have on the economic recovery? Jim, did you hear my question?
I didn't hear you.
I apologize. Sure. What impact could the election have on the economy?
I've been saying, until this crisis, I've been saying the election isn't going to have much of an impact because our economy was doing fine. There was no crisis. The fact that we were very divided was a sign to me that there was nothing really imminent to solve. Then now suddenly we have a crisis. Are you not hearing me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. So it's difficult to know because a crisis like this is not anyone's fault. This is something that happened, it came out of nowhere, right? And I think it's hard to picture. I don't think anyone is. Emergencies like this. This is when you need strong leadership and soothing leadership, and I think it's hard to see how anybody would be different and anything would be different from what we got. So I think what's going to determine the outcome is more the fundamental thing that was really behind this whole thing in the first place. There's a lot of people who are struggling, who feel like they've been left out. And I don't know that, you know, we're trying hard to figure out that these are largely folks in the manufacturing.
I think we're having technical difficulties with Jim.
Yep. All right, well, maybe we should, that's a sign of tails here. I will go ahead and cut off Jim here. He just fell off. Thank you everyone for attending the May monthly meeting. Please continue to check Robin's emails and our emails for continued communications regarding future events. We are trying to give as much information as possible in regarding to our COVID-19 website, as well as we are trying to plan for the fall for additional meetings. Thank you again for attending, and Jim, we'll have to thank you off to the side. We're sorry you had some technical difficulties there, but we do thank everybody who participated for this month's webinar. Stay safe out there.
All right. Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jim.
Bye.